clothes, hot meals, and a place to sleep, just as he did more than a decade before for Katrina survivors.
I feel I'm fulfilling my obligation that my parents taught me. I was very fortunate in my life to have wonderful parents that taught me that the essence of living is giving.
He's also willing to give even more in the form of higher property taxes as a Harris County business owner to help fund a $2.5 billion bond package the county is hoping to get passed. The cash infusion would fund improvements and repairs to the area's antiquated drainage system.
We have over 2,500 miles of channels that drain Harris County, and that's the distance flying from New York to Los Angeles.
Voters are expected to pass the bond measure with no real organized opposition. Officials estimate the average property owner will see a $10 hike in their taxes per year to pay for it.
I've learned a lot about the power of nature. I've also learned a lot about the power of man.
A year of lessons for so many, each family with their own story, touched in a different way. The National Hurricane Center estimates Harvey's damage at about $125 billion, making it the second costliest disaster in U.S. history behind Hurricane Katrina. In Houston, Casey Stiegel, Fox News.
Tropical Storm Lane now downgraded from a hurricane, but still dumping torrential rain on Hawaii. Adam Klotz is in the Fox Extreme Weather Center with an update on the storm and what to expect in your area. Adam.
Hey there, John. Harvey was the wettest hurricane on U.S. record. We now know that what was Hurricane Lane isn't going to be in the top 5 as they continue to see heavy rain. As much as 45 inches of rain it was reported in some areas on the Big Island, and that's where they've gotten the brunt of it. But we do have some good news. Winds continue to die down as this system is falling apart a little bit, currently at 50 miles an hour. And then notice the direction. It had been moving closer and closer to the islands, but now we see it shifting to the west, only at 7 miles an hour. But that means this is now leaving the islands and will continue to do so. It doesn't mean the rain's over, and there still are spots along the island chain, particularly the Big Island, where you continue to see some of these showers. But as it moves farther west, that does mean we're going to be clearing off here probably later tomorrow with all the rain. Here's the look at that, how that's going to move. Again, away from the islands. As it moves, it continues to weaken, becoming a large low pressure system. But as I said, it was a huge rainmaker. Most of that rain did come down there on the Big Island. Spots getting 30 to 40 inches, some spots more. And then widespread, even over towards Maui, 10 to 20 inches. So this has been a major rainmaker. The sooner it can move away, the better. Now, back in the States, back in the continental United States, the big story in the western half of the country continues to be elevated fire danger. These are red flag warnings, which means just a better chance. The winds are strong. The air continues to be very dry, John, and it is still hot from the Mountain West stretching over closer and closer to the coast. Fires are going to be an issue. Now, the one thing that they do need, or would be helpful, would be a little bit of rain. This is our rain forecast across the west, taking all the way into the middle of this upcoming week. You notice there are spots that get rain, but everywhere I just highlighted, where the fire danger has been the worst, where the winds have been the worst, unfortunately, there isn't any rain on the horizon. So it's going to be a story of the heat, which we continue to see across the middle of the country and out to the west. It's going to be a story of dry conditions, John. And unfortunately, the rain that they desperately need, it isn't coming anytime real soon.
Adam Klotz, thanks for the update.
Yep.
Well, tennis star Serena Williams trying now to defuse a clothing controversy after the head of the French Tennis Federation said he was banning a black catsuit Williams wore at the French Open. Williams saying she spoke with that official and that everything's fine and that they already resolved the issue. The ban sparked heavy criticism, with some fans calling it racist and sexist. Well, the party of the year for some furry four-legged friends, and you're invited too. Stay tuned.
With Advil, you'll ask, what's sore back? What bum knee? Advil is relief that's fast, strength that lasts. You'll ask, what pain? With Advil.
Liberty Mutual Accident Forgiveness means they won't hike your rates over one mistake. See? Liberty Mutual doesn't hold grudges.
For drivers with accident forgiveness, Liberty Mutual won't raise their rates because of their first accident.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Who would have thought? Who would have guessed? An energy company helping cars emit less, making cars lighter, it's a good place to start. Advanced oils for those hard-working parts. Fuels that go further, so drivers pump less. Improving efficiency is what we do best. Energy lives here.
A hotel can make or break a trip. And at Expedia, we don't think you should be rushed into booking one. That's why we created Expedia's Add-on Advantage. Now after booking your flight, you unlock discounts on select hotels, right until the day you leave. Add-on Advantage. Discounted hotel rates when you add on to your trip. Only when you book with Expedia.
I'm your Venus. The smoother the skin, the more comfortable you are in it. And now there's a new way to smooth. Introducing new Venus Platinum, a premium metal-handled boost control to reveal up to 100% smooth skin. Venus.
Do you need the most trusted battery in your wireless mouse? Maybe not. Maybe you could trust that during your fantasy draft, the computer won't auto-draft a kicker in the 7th round. Or you could just trust Duracell.
Metastatic breast cancer is relentless. But I'm relentless too.
MBC doesn't take a day off, and neither will I.
And I treat my MBC with new Everyday Verzenio, the only one of its kind that can be taken every day.
In fact, Verzenio is a CDK4 and 6 inhibitor for postmenopausal women with HR-positive, HER2-negative MBC, approved with hormonal therapy as an everyday treatment for a relentless disease. Verzenio plus an AI is proven to help women have significantly more time without disease progression, and more than half of women saw their tumors shrink versus an AI. Diarrhea is common, may be severe, and may cause dehydration or infection. Before taking Verzenio, tell your doctor if you have fever, chills, or other signs of infection. Verzenio may cause low white blood cell counts, which may cause serious infection that can lead to death. Serious liver problems can occur. Symptoms may include tiredness, loss of appetite, stomach pain, and bleeding or bruising more easily than normal. Blood clots that can lead to death have also occurred. Talk to your doctor right away if you notice pain or swelling in your arms or legs, shortness of breath, chest pain, or rapid breathing or heart rate. Tell your doctor if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, or plan to become pregnant. Common side effects include nausea, infections, low red and white blood cells and platelets, decreased appetite, headache, abdominal pain, tiredness, vomiting, and hair thinning or loss.
I'm relentless, and my doctor and I choose to treat my MBC with Verzenio.
Be relentless. Ask your doctor about Everyday Verzenio.
The Paris Zoo debuts its new baby jaguars. Here they are, born last month, weighing only 2 pounds apiece. And they are not the only new babies at the zoo. It also has 2 baby fossas. A fossa is a relative of the mongoose. There are only 2,000 of them said to be left on the planet. Well, the Dachshund Cafe in London throwing open its doors to hundreds of the short but long dogs and their owners. Pop-up event organizers held the sold-out one-day pooch party.
Well, we've had to search for the venues, first of all. While a lot of places are dog-friendly, it's important that they can have the full run of the place. They are ultimately the main customer, I guess, are the dogs, and they're bringing their humans.
If the dogs are happy, then we're happy.
Yeah, they're bringing their humans along as their guests today.
All canine visitors got free puppuccinos and a bag of popcorn. The invitation was extended to those without their own four-legged friends so they could spend time with the real thing. A lot of fun, but I bet it was loud in there. And that's how Fox reports on this Saturday, the 25th of August, 2018. I'm John Scott. Thanks for watching. Watters World is up next.
Welcome to Watters World. I'm Jesse Watters. It's been nearly 2 years since President Trump was duly elected. And for every day of that 2 years, politicians on the left, as well as the media, have made it their sole goal to stop Donald Trump and his agenda. It's not working. He continues to move forward in ways many people haven't seen in years. And now the left is in a panic mode. So much so that you can determine where Democrats stand just by taking the opposite position of the president. Ann Coulter's been studying that liberal meltdown and put it all together in a new book called Resistance is Futile: How the Trump-Hating Left Lost Its Collective Mind. Okay, well, this book's going to be another bestseller because your last 12 were. So let us begin with resistance. I've noticed the resistance more violent than when it was during the Bush years, more nasty, more disrespectful. And why do you think that is this time?
Well, I think it's really aesthetic. They just find him gauche. He's tacky, and they can't come out and just say, oh, it's so vulgar, all the gold fixtures. So they dress it up by saying, the nation is in crisis. There was Russian collusion. But the fact that they call themselves the resistance, I mean, that's pretty interesting in itself. Hillary herself, her opponent, calls her, or normally the opponent in an election is called the loyal opposition. Mm-hmm. She said she was joining the resistance. If Trump had done that, I mean, resistance is a military term. They'd be saying it's a Klan reference. You're calling out to the right-wing militias to attack Hillary supporters.
And it has been militant because of the way they're chasing people out of restaurants. They firebombed a limousine during the inauguration. It's been incredibly violent, and we've documented that violence on a number of occasions. You mentioned the Russia situation. Is there collusion? Is there a sniff of collusion? How did this thing all start again? I forget.
Well, it's interesting. It's fun to go back and have time on Nexus to see how these things began. First of all, the first time the Russian collusion thing was ever mentioned was it was just an excuse by Hillary Clinton, which she has a long history of doing. She blamed Jennifer Flowers on some man back in Arkansas who ran against her husband, and oh, he's very bitter and he lost the election. She blamed, of course, Monica Lewinsky on the vast right-wing conspiracy. She has this history of there's always some mysterious outside actor. And by the way, Clinton later admitted, or was proved with DNA evidence, to have been guilty of those particular scandals.
Right.
And I go through this long history she has of doing this. So, of course, when WikiLeaks, when the DNC emails go up, Democrats were furious with her. The DNC was in turmoil. I mean, they were all true emails. So she invents an excuse of this apocryphal enemy, the Russians. What's interesting, Robbie Mook, her campaign manager, first time it was ever mentioned was on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. At the time, the New York Times, the LA Times, even the Daily News, putting Trump, on its cover in a clown outfit every single day, all of them mocked the idea. That David Sanger and Nicole Perlmuth at the New York Times said it was a remarkable moment. And even at the height of the Cold War, no presidential candidate ever accused another one of being helped by an enemy power, and pointed out that Mook had cited only unnamed experts. Everyone was making fun of the experts. So mostly the media just, buried these stories. Hillary would bring it up during the debate. New York Times would put it on like page A14. It wasn't until Trump won the election and Hillary, as it's described in Shattered.
Exactly. They cooked up this excuse and then piped it into the bloodstream of the mainstream media. And that's when you get to hear all about the collusion and the corruption and the interference. You never would have heard that if she had won. It's very clear that was an excuse.
Not only that, there's still no evidence. And who cares? Lots of countries interfere in our elections. We interfere the heck out of their elections. George Soros in particular, I have a little section on his interference in all the Soviet republics' elections, spending, I think, $1 billion. It's all carefully footnoted. But even they have never produced any evidence that it was Russia that hacked. Evidence, not allegations. They're just going to nag us to death. Nothing has changed from when Robbie Mook announced this theory. They won't. There are veterans, intelligence professionals for sanity. They were the ones who were questioning the claims about weapons of mass destruction. They used to be beloved by the mainstream media. Now they're saying, where's the evidence that Russia was even the one who hacked the emails? And no one will produce it, but they're going to nag us to death until we all agree.
Now, what do you think would make Democrats feel better? Do they want impeachment? Do they want to go back to the Obama years? I mean, if they impeach, they have Pence. Do they really want that? What do you think would make the Democratic Party happy at this point, short of, I think, you know, literally removing President Trump from office?
Oh, as of November 8th, 2016, Trump was getting an independent counsel, and Mueller's name will be mud. They'll be taking out FISA warrants on him if he doesn't produce something on Trump. But it's been 2 years, and the best they can come up with is a campaign finance violation. By the way, if you watch the other networks, which all of my remotes are spot welded to, they're absolutely hysterical right now. Everything Trump does, exercise of political power, they're echoes of Watergate. It's Watergate. It's a constitutional crisis. The world is on fire when there isn't even a fire. It's a campaign finance violation. And as I point out in the book, John Edwards would be executed by now if Trump couldn't do what he was doing. The most important point of a campaign finance violation, I mean, there are a lot of points for why it was Trump's own money, but to make an expense a campaign finance issue at all, it has to be an expense that the candidate would not have spent but for the campaign. So in John Edwards' case, I mean, you have a pretty good argument. You have these very rich donors spending more than $1 million to support a mistress. Are they still supporting Rielle Hunter? Can we check to see if Bunny Mellon is still writing the checks?
He was
for her
acquitted
rent?
for that. A jury
Not
acquitted him.
only was he acquitted, but the prosecution itself was ridiculed at the time. He was immediately acquitted, and the Department of Justice dropped other charges. And you kind of have a case there. So in Trump's case, of course, I don't believe the women, by the way, but that's a separate point.
Okay.
There are nuisance lawsuits. He settled the Trump University case. Is that a campaign expense?
Yeah, he didn't have to file that with the FEC.
Yeah, if he hires a new florist for Mar-a-Lago, because how can you run for office if the flowers are wilting? You can't even keep that up. Is that
only
a
the best flowers, only the most beautiful, best-smelling flowers we've ever had. So you mentioned something in your book which I found interesting, is that you can't make jokes anymore. The late-night shows aren't funny. They're hit jobs against the president. They've lost their comedic timing, I think. It's just so angry and hateful. And on the right, you're not allowed to make jokes anymore because you're labeled a bigot or a racist or a homophobic person. It's like you can't even, Americans aren't with each other anymore. Everybody's just against each other, and you can't laugh sometimes at each other.
No, that's right. We're not working together in the era of Trump, and it's not Trump's fault. But comedy, normally a joke, it's a joke. It's recognized that there's a clever little twist at the end. Now comedy is just a long string of invective, and the number of syllables. You use an SAT word like feckless, throw in a curse word about the president.
That's right. That's all they have.
And the audience applauds, and HuffPo loves it.
And even the president himself, when he said, oh, you know, Russia, you know, if you're listening, could we get some of Hillary's emails? I think Mueller's looking at that statement for collusion.
An obvious joke. And by the way, you know who the first person was to tell that joke? It's in the book. I was so excited about this because I did a full Nexus search.
Who was it?
Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Oh!
On The Five, your show. And then it was told by Bobby Jindal and Scott Walker in the debates. It was mentioned by all these newspapers, and they all thought it was a great joke. They were giving, I forget who it was, either Walker or Jindal, best line of the debate. But then Trump says it. No, we're taking him seriously. It's a secret message to Putin. They've lost their minds.
They've lost their minds, and all of those people were crying when Trump was elected. All of the people that are supposed to be independent journalists, which you see them all these shows, the Meet the Press people, these pundits that are above it all, they were in tears when Hillary lost, and now they present themselves as these objective arbiters of truth and honesty in America, and they nitpick everything this president says, and they're supposed to be fair. I mean, they're working for the Democratic Party, and then when Trump says you're working for the Democrats, he says you're the enemy of the truth or the enemy of the people, they say, oh, We're under attack now. We're in danger. Meanwhile, it's the Trump supporters that are getting punched in the face.
Yes. It's like we're living in 1984 with, this apocryphal Emmanuel Goldstein enemy. and actual conservatives are getting beaten up and needing bodyguards. One thing about the comedy thing, conservatives are still, and certainly Trump is still telling jokes, but you're right, we're at risk of being thrown in prison for microaggressions. But what I like about how the resistance has changed the left is liberals have always, especially in New York and Vanity Fair, Spy Magazine, they've always kind of prided themselves on being cool. Well, don't you have to be cool to be cool? They're the ones, they'd make fun of conservatives for freaking out over things and conspiracy theories. They're the ones freaking out, and conservatives are perfectly fine.
That's right. I think Trump's just cooler than they are, more talented and funnier, and they can't take it. And there it is. Everybody buy it. Resistance is futile. Up next, the great one, Mark Levin, on the real story behind the Donald Trump and Michael Cohen situation.
Here's your Buick, sir.
Actually, that's my Buick.
Your Buick doesn't have a roof rack. This is my Buick.
How are we gonna fit in your mom's Buick?
Easy.
I like that new Buick.
Me too.
I was actually talking about that Buick.
I knew that.
Did you?
Buick's fresh new lineup is full of surprises. Get 18% below MSRP on most 2018 Encore models when you finance through GM Financial. Or get over $5,400 below MSRP on this Envision Preferred.
This is not a bed. It's a revolution in sleep. The new Sleep Number 360 smart bed is on sale now from $899 during Sleep Number's biggest sale of the year. It senses your movement and automatically adjusts to keep you both comfortable. It even helps with this. So you wake up ready to put your pedal to the metal. And now all beds are on sale. Save 50% on the new Sleep Number 360 limited edition smart bed, plus 24-month financing and free home delivery. End Saturday. Sleep Number, proven quality sleep.
It was here. I couldn't catch my breath.
It was the last song of the night. Felt like my heart was skipping beats.
They said I had AFib.
What's AFib?
I knew that meant I was at a greater risk of stroke.
I needed answers.
My doctor and I chose Xarelto.
To help keep me protected from a stroke.
Once daily Xarelto, a latest generation blood thinner, significantly lowers the risk of stroke in people with AFib not caused by a heart valve problem. Warfarin interferes with at least 6 of your body's natural blood clotting factors. Xarelto is selective, targeting just one critical factor. For AFib patients well managed on warfarin, there is limited information on how Xarelto compares in reducing the risk of stroke. Don't stop taking Xarelto without talking to your doctor, as this may increase your risk of stroke. While taking, you may bruise more easily or take longer for bleeding to stop. Xarelto can cause serious and, in rare cases, fatal bleeding. It may increase your risk of bleeding if you take certain medicines. Get help right away for unexpected bleeding or unusual bruising. Do not take Xarelto if you have an artificial heart valve or abnormal bleeding. Before starting, tell your doctor about all planned medical or dental procedures and any kidney or liver problems.
Learn all you can
to help protect yourself from a stroke.
Talk to your doctor about Xarelto.
Breakfast wants you back. Try new Just Crack an Egg, packed with diced potatoes, veggies, meat, and cheese. Just add a fresh egg for a hot scramble in less than 2 minutes to get those warm, fuzzy feelings again. Take breakfast back. Find it in the egg aisle.
I was looking for somebody who wanted to find love.
At eHarmony, we ask you questions so that we can match you for a lasting connection.
I found my person.
I really found my true love on eHarmony.
eHarmony.com, the #1 trusted dating site. Start for free today.
Are the credit cards in your wallet actually the best ones for you? At NerdWallet, we sort through hundreds of credit cards to find the top cards for balance transfer, travel, earning rewards, and other perks. Using your unique info to narrow the search, NerdWallet makes it easy to find credit cards that work harder than the ones you have now. Stop missing out. Visit nerdwallet.com to find the cards that are made for you.
Look at that, look. It's a fox.
What is it?
Yeah, a fox.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What is that?
A fox.
You know, somebody's going to be happy you said that 3 times.
All new season of Last Man Standing, Fridays this fall on
Fox.
Michael Cohen, Trump's former attorney, pled guilty to 8 counts of bank and tax fraud this week. In addition, he pled to 2 counts of campaign finance violations involving payments made to a porn star and a Playboy model. Donald Trump sat down with Ainsley Earnhardt.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on, I knew. Later on. But you have to understand, Ainsley, what he did, and they weren't taken out of campaign finance. That's a big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me, and I tweeted about it.
The president adding that if you're looking at hard time, you're going to flip and plead to whatever the prosecutors want you to.
There's this whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers. Everything's wonderful, and then they get 10 years in jail, and they flip on whoever the next highest one is, or as high as you can go. It almost ought to be outlawed. It's not fair. But if somebody defrauded a bank, and he's going to get 10 years in jail or 20 years in jail, but if you can say something bad about Donald Trump, and you'll go down to 2 years or 3 years, which is the deal he made, in all fairness to him, most people are going to do that.
But the left, ready to impeach.
Given the events of today, the likelihood of impeachment, I'm not saying it's high necessarily, but it certainly went up.
Impeachment.
Impeached.
Impeachment. Impeachment.
Impeachment.
Impeachment.
Impeachment.
Impeachment.
The president is clearly guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. He should resign his office or be impeached.
Today, the Trump presidency took a giant step toward impeachment.
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 Impeachment implications are now in the air.
Impeachment.
Impeachment.
Impeachment. Impeachment.
If it is a crime, it certainly is an impeachable offense.
Impeach Trump.
Impeachment.
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 So here to sort things out, the host of Life, Liberty, and Levin, right here on Fox News, which is now the #1 show on Sunday nights, and the host of CRTV's Levin TV, the great one, Mark Levin. All right, so Mark, this reminds me of the John Edwards situation, where a bunch of rich fat cats gave the guy about 700 G's to help cover up his affair and protect his wife. And prosecutors went after him hard, and the jury said, you know what? This is all personal. Now, I look at this thing, and I think, why can't this be personal? What's the difference?
Well, it is, and I was watching the president there in that interview. He's actually a pretty good lawyer. He's a better lawyer than the deputy U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, who is a complete thug, as far as I'm concerned. This is a non-disclosure agreement, or several of them. Let's take the worst-case scenario. Let's say the President of the United States directed his private lawyer to pay in 2 cases, out of his private funds and out of his corporate funds.
Right.
A matter that does not arise out of the campaign. That's the key. Things that are alleged to have occurred before the campaign.
Right.
That is not a campaign contribution. It's never been a campaign contribution. And just because a deputy U.S. attorney and his fellow assistant U.S. attorneys in that office say, well, that influenced the campaign. It was intended to influence a campaign. Lots of things that influence a campaign that are positive. People get haircuts, they buy new suits, they settle lawsuits, all kinds of things that go on. This has nothing to do with a campaign expenditure.
Yeah,
Moreover,
so let me ask you though, so Mark, so if I go buy, if I'm running for president and, you know, I get my teeth whitened, my hair cut, I get new suits and ties, and I pay for it out of my own pocket, is that all of a sudden a campaign expenditure? Why can't I just, you know, want to look better? I mean, maybe it also affects how I look on the campaign trail, but I mean, it's not a legitimate campaign expenditure.
That's correct. It's not a campaign expenditure because it doesn't arise out of a direct campaign event. But let me go on about this, how outrageous this is. Mr. Cohen didn't go to court. Mr. Cohen pled.
Yeah.
To cover his own butt.
Right.
Mr. Cohen was charged with 5 tax felonies, 1 bank felony, and 2 campaign felonies. And his lawyer, who is a Hillary Clinton hack and typically a lobbyist, right afterwards is all over TV doing exactly what we knew he would do. It's about Trump, 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 not about his client.
Right.
Now, that said, what this prosecutor did in the Southern District of New York is he held a prosecutorial gun to Cohen's head.
Yep.
We can give you 3 to 5, or we'll give you 30. Now, which is it? I want 3 to 5. Well, you must plead to these 2 campaign events. Great. Then he goes to the guy at the National Enquirer. He says to him, look, we know that you were involved also in this matter, and you paid for a story that you then spiked, and we consider that a campaign contribution. I will give you immunity, but you need to say, yes, you agree, right?
And
yes, I agree.
Exactly. And think about what this all came out of. Lanny's people over at the Clinton team, they were the one that cooked up this dossier that put the crosshairs on Michael Cohen, which ended up to be a total lie, and that got him all this attention where the prosecutors came after him. They're raiding his place, his home, his apartment, and now putting a gun to his head, as you said, and making him plead to this. And then Lanny's out there saying for the Clintons, because this is to avenge Hillary's loss, he's saying, oh, yeah, Michael Cohen may know something about the Trump-Russia Don Jr. meeting or something like that. Meanwhile, when Cohen went up to the Senate and House and investigators, he said he didn't know anything about Donald Trump's involvement in that. It's all lies.
I really want to focus on what this U.S. attorney doing and how evil it is. So Cohen pleads, right?
Yeah.
So he never, he doesn't have to, there's no trial. Then he gets the head of the National Enquirer. Immunity, no trial. Then he gets this guy, Weaselberg, or whatever his name is. He gets immunity from Trump World, right?
Yeah.
To basically say, yeah, Trump made these payments, perfectly legal payments, private payments, not reportable, not campaign payments. So what's he doing, this prosecutor? If it is the position of the United States Justice Department, which has now been admitted by Mr. Mueller, that you cannot indict a sitting president, what are they doing? I'll tell you what they're doing, and this is the important point.
Yeah.
Now that they know they cannot indict a sitting president, which I've been saying for a year and a half based on the Department of Justice memos, what are they doing? They are piling up through their criminal investigations, misusing prosecutorial tools and taxpayer dollars, items for impeachment, campaign violations, the use of funds, corporate funds, violating limits. And the President of the United States now is the only citizen in the United States of America who cannot defend himself because he cannot be indicted. Now, the left will say, well, then indict him. He has to defend the office of the presidency. More than that, let me tell you another little secret, Jesse, that the professors and the rest of them will, I want to remind them in their next show, which is this. Under impeachment, you cannot impeach a president for events that occurred before he was president.
Right.
So I want the dummy who runs the Southern District of New York to understand all this work you're doing is for naught. That doesn't mean the mob of Democrats who take over the House one day won't try it. But you cannot impeach a sitting president of the United States for events that occurred before he was president of the United States. So this is all very diabolical, very evil. Impeachment's being pushed by the media, as shown by that montage that you want. But the fact of the matter is, the president has done nothing wrong. He hasn't made illegal payments. He hasn't violated campaign laws. He hasn't obstructed justice. He didn't collude with the Russians. This is all a horrible, horrible spectacle.
And if he does try to fight back, in any even small measure, he's accused of obstruction. He can't get rid of anybody. He can't tweet about anybody. He can't make a comment about his own Justice Department, about Mueller, about anybody. He's accused of obstruction of justice. They've put him in this box somehow. They don't allow him to fight back over crimes that most people don't even believe are crimes, and they're just bloodying him up before the midterms. And if the Democrats retake the House, it's game over.
The abuse of power by Mr. Mueller, the abuse of power in the Southern District of New York, what is taking place here is unprecedented. And then when you see the media, oh, the free press, does it sound like a free press to anybody, really? It sounds like a propaganda machine for the Democrat Party. They sound like demagogues. They use the free press to advance their ideological agenda, and they are leading impeachment, they are leading these criminal issues and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, the American people need to stand up. They need to defend the office of the presidency, the president, the Constitution, and their franchise. They voted for this president, and these elitists and these prosecutors have no right to remove him.
All right, there he is, Mark Levin. See his show on Sunday night. A New York Times reporter compares President Trump to a dictator and says he wants to murder people in the streets. Where do you see this next?
This is my jam. Keep me partying till the AM. Y'all don't understand. Make me
Some believe if it's not German, it's not luxury performance. So we brought these Infiniti SUVs to Germany with American families to drive them.
This truck is only for German luxury auto, not for family or SUV.
VC Turbo. It's like 2 engines in one. How did Germany not do that first?
The Infiniti family of SUVs. There's nothing traditional about it.
Lease the Infiniti QX50 for $379 a month
At the Start Your Own Legacy summer sales event. Infiniti. Empower the drive.
Know what?
No, what?
I just switched to Geico and got more.
More?
Got a company I can trust.
That's a heck of a lot more.
Over 75 years of great savings and service.
You can't argue with more.
Why would you?
Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.
Pella window designs. They're tested from -40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit and subjected to wind-driven rain. They're even engineered to stop hurricane debris from penetrating your home. All with distinctive style that goes beyond the ordinary. Pella windows and doors. Perfectly beautiful.
I have suffered my whole life with muscle cramping. When I tried Therawix, all the cramping went away. I initially applied it at the bottom of my foot and my thigh, and right away, I was able to sleep through the night. Therawix is definitely a breakthrough. It's a little miracle. I can cook again. I can sit at my computer for 8 hours a day with my mouse and typing, and I don't hurt.
Therawix Relief is my choice for preventing and relieving muscle cramps. Make it yours too.
Get Therawix Relief today at TherawixRelief.com.
I've been helping my mom manage her medication for about 2 years now.
My son told me about PillPack, and I've been taking it ever since. The pills are kept separately, and I know what I'm supposed to take each day.
PillPack allowed for my mom to stay in her home for a longer period, which is what she really wanted and what we all wanted.
My doctors see a difference in me taking PillPack. It feels very good.
Switch to a better pharmacy at PillPack.com today.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned.
Call or go to MyPillow.com. Use the promo code and save over 50% with Mike's 4-pack. You'll get 2 MyPillow premiums and 2 Go Anywhere pillows. It's one of his best offers ever. Order now.
With our 60-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. Sleep well, America!
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
Fox News Channel on Sirius XM. Your favorite shows on Channel 114. Plus, every story, every 15 minutes. Fox News headlines 24/7 at Channel 115.
Where do I toss it? This is a Fox News alert. I'm Marianne Rafferty. Arizona Senator John McCain, we're just getting word, war hero John McCain has died. McCain's death coming shortly after it was revealed that he was no longer seeking treatment for his brain cancer. McCain diagnosed with brain cancer in July of last year. That tumor discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot. McCain, born August 29th, 1936 at the Coco Solo Naval Station in Panama. That's a U.S. territory, was a U.S. territory at the time. The son and grandson of the 4-star admirals. McCain graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1958, and then later flight school. That was in 1960. At the start of the Vietnam War, McCain volunteering for active combat duty. In 1967, during a bombing run, though, his plane was shot down. He was captured and held a prisoner of war until 1973. Now, for his service, McCain earned the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and also the Distinguished Flying Cross. After his release, he then later served as senator from the state of Arizona. McCain ran for president for the first time back in 2000, but lost a heated primary season to former President George W. Bush. He eventually secured the nomination back in 2008, but lost the general election to former President Barack Obama. Again, if you're just joining us, Senator John McCain, dead at the age of 81. Here's a look back at his life.
John Sidney McCain III was born in 1936 at a naval air station in the Panama Canal Zone. McCain's father and grandfather were both four-star admirals. The family moved often between bases on the mainland and abroad. It was inevitable he would pursue a Navy career, and Ensign McCain graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1958. As war broke out in Vietnam, McCain volunteered for duty. He flew attack planes against the North Vietnamese and escaped serious injury in June 1967 when a rocket aboard the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal accidentally struck McCain's plane. Explosions and fires killed 134 people.
I felt this tremendous blow to my airplane and saw the fire coming out, so I probably had reacted a little more quickly than those in the planes near me. Some of those in the planes near me didn't survive.
On his 23rd air mission on October 26, 1967, his plane was shot down, this time during a bombing mission over Hanoi. The North Vietnamese captured him and moved him to the infamous Hanoi Hilton prison.
He was terribly injured, fractured arms, broken knee, left arm was out of the socket. He had not been fed, and basically he was starving to death.
McCain's captors offered him early release because he was an admiral's son, but he refused. He endured torture and more than 3 years in solitary confinement. He said Air Force Colonel Day saved his life.
Bud Day was the most steadfast, the most inspirational, and the toughest of anybody that I must have something to do with his Iowa upbringing.
McCain was released in 1973 and awarded Silver and Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. His wounds left him with impaired physical abilities for the rest of his life. He retired from the Navy as a captain in 1981 after marrying Cindy Hensley, a teacher from Arizona. He moved to Phoenix and got into politics, serving 2 terms in the House of Representatives. He was elected to the Senate in 1986, where he developed a reputation as a maverick. While he voted with his party most of the time, it became clear he was willing to buck Republican leadership and occasionally align with Democrats. McCain's political career hit a bump in 1989 when he and 4 other senators, the Keating Five, were implicated in a savings and loan scandal and accused of corruption. A Senate Ethics Committee investigation found that though McCain used poor judgment, he was not guilty of any wrongdoing. McCain said that experience inspired him to co-author the McCain-Feingold bill on campaign finance reform with Wisconsin Senator Russ Feingold, which finally passed in 2001. And as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, he took on the tobacco industry with legislation to increase cigarette taxes. McCain published a memoir, Faith of My Fathers, in 1999. It became a bestseller and later a film. In the meantime, he announced his candidacy for president, appealing to independents and traveling aboard the Straight Talk Express. But after defeat in South Carolina, Texas Governor George W. Bush gained momentum, and McCain went on to lose 9 of 13 primaries on Super Tuesday. He withdrew from the race in March 2000, returning to the Senate. The senator threw his support behind President Bush and the Iraq War, but he later criticized the Bush administration for not sending enough troops to Iraq. He became the first Republican senator to demand Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's resignation.
We're in one heck of a mess in Iraq, and the American people told us loud and clear last week that they're not happy. They're not happy with the course of this war. Neither am I.
He also continued to partner with his colleagues on the other side of the aisle. McCain and Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy made a push for comprehensive immigration reform, though the legislation failed to pass both houses. With President Bush's second term coming to a close, McCain again announced his candidacy for president.
I do so grateful for the privilege this country has already given me, mindful that I must seek this responsibilities for reasons greater than my self-interest.
This time, McCain won the majority of delegates on Super Tuesday, and then in the March 4th primaries, giving him the lead he needed to secure the nomination. McCain's surprise vice presidential pick was Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. Together, the two surged ahead of Democratic candidate and Illinois Senator Barack Obama and VP candidate Joe Biden in the polls following the Republican National Convention. But Obama gained momentum and ultimately defeated McCain in the general election.
These are difficult times for our country, and I pledge to him tonight to do all in my power to help him lead us through the many challenges we face.
As ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, McCain remained active on foreign policy. He rallied for military intervention in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi, pushed for democratic reforms in Egypt, and called for withholding U.S. aid to the Egyptian army after it ousted President Mohamed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood party. He also publicly criticized the Obama administration for its handling of the September 11, 2012 attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi that killed 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens.
Have no doubt, we are holding the President of the United States responsible, and he is responsible, and he has given contrasting versions of events to the American people.
In 2015, McCain became chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and used the platform to push for an expanded U.S. military presence in Iraq and Syria and a new strategy in Afghanistan.
We need to have a strategy to win. The strongest nation on earth should be able to win.
As the 2016 presidential election candidates began to emerge and he campaigned for his own Senate re-election, McCain pledged to support the eventual Republican nominee. He later pulled his endorsement of Donald Trump, citing their differences on public policy issues like national security and Trump's controversial comments about women. Then, in the midst of his 6th Senate term, he underwent surgery to remove a blood clot above his left eye and was later diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor. Despite a poor cancer prognosis, he remained a dominant voice in the Senate, at times going against his own party's efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare. In July 2017, some senators audibly gasped as Arizona senator gave a memorable thumbs-down gesture on the floor. McCain cast the deciding no vote, which killed the GOP's health care measure. All this as McCain released another memoir in his final days, The Restless Wave, a brutally honest assessment of his highs and lows, personal and professional. The Maverick senator offered this candid assessment, writing, "I'm not sure what to make of President Trump's convictions. His reaction to unflattering news stories, calling them fake news, whether they're credible or not, is copied by autocrats who want to discredit and control a free press. Flattery secures his friendship, criticism his enmity." In an audiobook excerpt, the man who made public service his life's passion reflected on what he considered his unfinished legacy.
Maybe I'll be gone before you hear this. My predicament is, well, rather unpredictable. But I'm prepared for either contingency, or at least I'm getting prepared. I have some things I'd like to take care of first, some work that needs finishing, and some people I need to see. And I want to talk to my fellow Americans a little more, if I may.
John McCain is survived by his wife Cindy and 7 children. In Washington, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
If you're just joining us, Senator John McCain dead at the age of 81. We're going to pause now for just a moment and allow our Fox affiliates around the country to join us. If you're just joining us, this is a Fox News alert. Arizona Senator and war hero John McCain has died. McCain's death coming shortly after it was revealed that he was no longer going to seek any treatment for brain cancer that he was diagnosed with in July of last year. The tumor discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot. McCain was born August 29, 1936 at the Coco Solo Naval Station in Panama. That was a U.S. territory at the time. The son and grandson grandson of 4-star admirals. McCain graduated from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1958, later attending flight school and graduating in 1960. At the start of the Vietnam War, McCain volunteered for combat duty, and then in 1967, during a bombing run, his plane was shot down and he was captured and held as a prisoner of war until 1973. Now, for his service, McCain earned the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and also the Distinguished Flying Cross. After his release from being a prisoner of war, he served as a Republican congressman, then also later as a senator from the state of Arizona. McCain also ran for president for the first time in 2000, but lost a heated primary season to former President George W. Bush. But he eventually secured the nomination in 2008, but then lost the general election to former President Barack Obama. Let's go ahead and go now to Fox News anchor Bret Baier, who is joining us now live from Washington, D.C. Bret, what can you tell us? This was expected. We had heard a statement from the family, but now, as we just said, John McCain dead at the age of 81.
Yeah, Marianne, it's a sad day because there are not many John McCains out there in the world, and he was unique on Capitol Hill. His ability to stand up to not only his party, but his ability to reach across the aisle and have relationships and get things done in an environment in Washington that is obviously increasingly partisan. John McCain was a unique figure. He always was, not only from the time that he served in Vietnam and spent that time in the Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war, but also as a senator, where he fought vigorously for the U.S. military. He fought vigorously for counterterrorism efforts against al-Qaeda and terrorists around the world, and also fought for regular order in the United States Senate. He is one of these figures that is kind of a lion of the Senate. If you think of the Senate, Ted Kennedy, Orrin Hatch, John McCain is a big name when it comes to the U.S. Senate. And it's a sad day. The 2008 presidential nominee, obviously taking a lot of controversy, and some conservatives really had a problem with his vote on Obamacare late in the night on the Senate floor with the thumbs down on repealing and replacing Obamacare, but gave one of his most impassioned speeches saying that regular order had to happen, and that it wasn't about stuffing legislation down lawmakers' throats. He was somebody who stood up to power, and he was a unique figure in American history. And I think you can't really put your finger on many people who have served as much or the kind of service that John McCain has served the United States.
And, Bret, even though you didn't hear from him as much, in the last years he was fighting cancer, he was still very much involved in a lot of the major votes that were going on Capitol Hill.
He was, and, considered coming back for several of them. The defense bill that passed was named for John McCain, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. I covered the Pentagon for 6.5 years, and there would be, different branches of the military who would have to testify in front of the Armed Services Committee, and right? specifically John McCain, and they would shudder because he would really get after them about, pricing and what exactly they were doing for the betterment of the U.S. military. He was a big, big figure on Capitol Hill. And tonight, I think there are people on both sides of the aisle, an outpouring of support and statements supporting the family and offering prayers.
All right, Bret, we're going to come back to you in just a moment, but our coverage will continue now on Fox News Channel, on cable and satellite, so stay with us for much more on this. Again, if you're just now joining us, John McCain dead at the age of 81. All right, Brett, we are back with you now. And, we've been discussing the distinguished career and life of John McCain. You were talking about the fact that, he had a reputation for sometimes going against, his own party, against the Republican Party, earning that nickname, the Maverick. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, and I think he relished it, actually. I mean, he kind of liked doing it because he wasn't a traditional figure. He ran in some races in Arizona as a staunch conservative, and obviously had very conservative views, but also reached across the aisle and tried to make deals and tried to make, different things happen that perhaps were not where the Republican Party was at one moment. In the year 2000, when he ran for president against George W. Bush, he rode the Straight Talk Express, his bus with reporters, and he was really catching fire there for some time and kind of fell short in South Carolina, but then got the nomination in 2008. Lindsey Graham just tweeting out, his good friend,
All right, I think we just lost Bret Baier. We're going to try to get back to him for more on this in just a few moments. But if you're just joining us, John McCain has died at the age of 81. He was an Arizona senator and also a war hero. His death coming shortly after it was revealed that he was no longer going to seek treatment for his brain cancer, a glioblastoma, a type of brain tumor, brain cancer. McCain was diagnosed with brain cancer back in July of last year, but the tumor was discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot. McCain was born back in August of 1936 at the Coco Solo Naval Station in Panama, which was a U.S. territory at the time. He is the son and grandson of four-star admirals, so the military ran in his family. McCain graduating from the Naval Academy in Annapolis in 1958. He then later went to flight school, graduating in 1960. Then at the beginning of the Vietnam War, McCain volunteered for combat duty. In 1967, during a bombing run, his plane was shot down and he was captured and held as a prisoner of war until 1973. For his service, he earned several top military honors, the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. We've got Bret Baier now back with us. Bret, we want to talk a little bit more about John McCain and his distinguished career, not just in the military, but serving the people of the United States as both a congressman and a senator from the state of Arizona. We were just talking about how he sometimes, went against what was popular in his own party and voted his conscience. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, sure. I was in the middle of giving you Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina.
Yes.
His good friend just tweeted out, America and freedom have lost one of her greatest champions, and I've lost one of my dearest friends and mentor. I will need some time to absorb this, but I want Cindy and the entire McCain family to know they're in my prayers. Remember that when John McCain ran for president, Lindsey Graham and Senator Joe Lieberman, independent from Connecticut, Democrat who caucused with the independent, then won as an independent. They were the three amigos campaigning, and in part campaigning on reaching across the aisle. Lieberman often talked about how John McCain was a driving force, especially when it came to U.S. foreign policy and military policy. And obviously the party, the Republican Party, believed that he would be a strong candidate in 2008, and obviously fell to Barack Obama in that election in 2008. Since then, he has been a force. He has always been a force on Capitol Hill, and continued to be really up to his last days.
You talk about him being a force. You often hear people talk about the fact that, he voted his conscience, always voted his conscience, and voted against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which we had discussed earlier. Tell us more about that and how that, affected how he was viewed on Capitol Hill.
Well, I think on Capitol Hill was one thing, and the White House was another. I don't see a statement yet from President Trump, but Melania Trump has just tweeted out our thoughts, prayers, and deepest sympathy to the McCain family. Thank you, Senator McCain, for your service to the nation. President Obama has just put a statement out saying, John McCain and I were members of different generations, came from completely different backgrounds, and competed at the highest level of politics. But we shared, for all our differences, a fidelity to something higher, the ideals for which generations of Americans and immigrants alike have fought, marched, and sacrificed. He goes on to say our heartfelt condolences to Cindy and the family from Michelle and Barack Obama. Obviously, the healthcare vote sticks in the craw of President Trump. He believed he had everything lined up, and John McCain made a stand there. And had it not been for John McCain's vote, that would have moved forward. And we don't know what that would have led to legislatively. But he was someone who would do that and kind of relish that role to stand on principle. And he made his case on the Senate floor, the last speech that he gave, saying that the country should get together and solve things that we agree on first, argue about things that we don't agree on, but fight about it in a process and a civil way on the Senate floor.
And, you know, that's what we heard a lot. Again, him, you know, never really just following. He always, you know, went in his own direction, earning that nickname, the Maverick. And, you know, making that case on the Senate floor, you know, that we should all come together. We should figure out a way to agree, especially when it comes